said. I think the risk in relying on the current statistics that are out there that, if you Google, total market cap of cannabis companies in Canada, the answer you get from week to week will change astronomically. And there's all kinds of literature out there that will tell you the size of market demand, supply, number of patients, the value of companies. I would be very cautious relying on that. And another risk is I'm very curious to see where pricing goes, because I think some companies that are valuing their inventory far too high. Some aren't. Some are doing a better job at it. But I think that's also another risk that you have to be careful as an investor. How is the company that you're looking to invest in valuing the assets they have, and what is their margin based on that estimation? And over time, as the rec market comes to fruition, the companies that really were not cautious, but were more cognizant of the fact that their costs are going to come down, the price of the gram is going to come down, they're the ones that are going to probably survive.
I'll take that kind of from two ways. I think the average investor probably, for U.S. companies, I think you may overestimate the regulatory review. I mean, for the early LPs in Canada, it's such a regulatory gauntlet to get to production that Health Canada, in a way, did a lot of due diligence for the investing community if you got to that point. When you look at other jurisdictions, I think you need to dig deeper, just because you don't have a really tough regulator that's doing part of your job. But in Canada specifically, the value of the cultivation license really dropped. The heavy inspection now is the sales license. And so I think that's the big difference over the last 6 months or so, that people are probably putting too much value on the cultivation license because the real hard inspection is the sales.
And I would just like to reiterate that point, that this is a trader's market. So if you're an investor, you may not appreciate what it means that we've got record shorts coming out of the United States in the market, and how that's going to impact your investment and your hard dollars.
Some of the market risks that it's the United States. I mean, we're all sort of dancing around it right now, but the person in charge of that country does have an effect on the market. So, be aware of the political risks that are associated with investing in those companies as well.
I think the U.S. market, though, the risk-reward ratio from the U.S. market, when the valuations are so much lower, I think some of the biggest wins will be in companies that are going to be listed on CSC over the next year. Some great names coming up with real revenues. And so, the striking the gold mine and hitting the lottery ticket on some of these U.S. investments, that's where there'll be some great wins.
Yeah, and again, I would go to the management advisory board. I'd pull up your sleeves and look at who's got the winning records. I mean, Hadley from Ianthus, if you look at his record, it was a winning record. When I met with Terry Flood before he went public, he had a winning record as an entrepreneur. You gotta really do some serious due diligence.
Another risk that I think I'd like to mention too is, because the cannabis industry is so new, and most of the real leaders in the industry are young people with a lot of great ideas who are really pushing their businesses, who are ambitious and want to move things quickly. Is unfortunately a lot of them don't have public company experience that comes along with running a public business. And so that's another thing I think you should look at when you look at the management team is, I think you need the entrepreneurial spirit in the industry right now, because that's what's driving it, and it's a breath of fresh air. But you also need to look at, is the management team able to operate and push the company forward as a public company in the public market. So.
What are some of the pros and cons of investing in medically focused cannabis companies as opposed to companies that are exclusively targeting the rec market?
Yeah, and I think it's a jurisdictional issue in Canada. I think once the federal and provincial cannabis laws come into effect, they'll effectively acquiesce with the current medical regime, the ACMPR. So I don't think it's a huge issue in Canada. I think all the big players are looking to the rec market right now. In the United States, of course, again, getting back to the U.S. I think the vast majority of states at some level have legalized cannabis, and I think the court systems are a little bit more lenient towards companies that are operating in and the regulators are a little bit more lenient toward companies that are operating in the medical space. And so again, it's totally a jurisdictional issue. I don't think it's as big an issue in Canada.
I'm going to be more aggressive with my answer. Again, I think getting real quality information. I like your comment about understanding securities and compliance. I think I just told a company last week. I said no. You can't start promoting until you put out your news release. It's got to cross the wire. If a choice between recreational or medicinal at this time, I think the recreational market in Canada, because that's what this panel is, right? Canadian recreational. We don't know if we're going to be decrimmed or not this year, and that's a real issue. I think people are moving aggressively forward with the assumption that we are, but we've got the C45 and C46 political issues in this market also have to be looked at. And then, so a smart investor, at least our site, Investor Intel, is really pointing people towards the ancillary revenue, or ancillary services, because they handle the medicinal, they service medicinal, and they service recreational. There's no question recreational will be a huge game to be in on, but unless we decrim, it's a waste. You might as well just park your money.
As far as the Canadian Securities Exchange is concerned, it's medicinal. We operate in the medicinal facility, and that's where we are. We obviously know that companies are lining themselves up, as well as other industries, other banks, for the rec market. Do I think it's coming? Yeah, I personally do think it's coming. But to echo Tracy, I don't know if it's going to be this year. I don't know when. I'd like it to be. I think it's actually going to be a really, really big thing. But I like the base of the medicinal first. So.
Of course, with the recreational, if it's an American company and the jurisdiction is fine, then you do have a good investment that's listing on the CSE.
Just speaking from the Canadian perspective, the medical market is the most valuable market on a per customer basis. Your provinces can't intermediate themselves into that relationship because of the way we do through the courts and the charter protection. So you get to direct medical retail to customers and capture great margin. And then international exports are only medical, again, great margin. So the direct market is a big market, but the margins are much lower. So I think it's a very different business. But from a pure pharma perspective, we see a lot of investments, a lot of people looking at whether it's encapsulation or IP around kind of very more traditional pharma products. So I'm really weary of those because it's hard, there's a lot of noise, and big pharma knows how to do that. So I would not want to be funding a small startup that's going to be competing right up against the big guys in the pure pharma segment.
Many U.S.-based firms are listing in Canada to obtain better valuations. Should investors treat these U.S.-based companies differently than the Canadian companies?
I'm going to jump right in. Valuations; that's a tricky subject. Again, the opinions that I'm expressing are my own, and maybe not at the Securities Exchange. The valuations are pretty high, and what we saw in the early days was if a Canadian company is getting one, and I'm a U.S. company and I'm 10 times their size, I'm just going to move up here and get 10 times the value. It doesn't work like that, and if you see companies doing that, that is not really the right math to be doing. So just be wary. A lot of the U.S. companies now are taking a more cautious approach. Their valuations are falling more in line with their peers, but again, that's just the evolution of the cannabis market that we've seen.
Playing just devil's advocate, because I think I wouldn't come up here and say that the valuations are too low, but I think if you are bullish on the market, you would say that certainly the international component and the global market size is probably underestimated. I think alcohol is the best analog. I think cannabis will be larger than alcohol and probably a lot faster than we expect. We see European countries falling like dominoes in the medical program, and each jurisdiction that puts in a medical or rec program is another data point for a policymaker in another country to rely on. It becomes a much safer decision to legalize when every other country happens. It becomes a job risk for a public servant to not put that program in place at some point. So that's happening. And so I think the market is a lot bigger than we expect, both on the rec side, but then pharmaceutical inputs. Every new drug that gets produced, you're going to need at the moment. But I think
legalization in Canada is really going to be the first domino to go. And once the U.S. Regulators and the U.S. lawmakers see the positive effects and really the growth in the capital market spectrum in Canada, I think it'll be only a matter of time before it becomes legal in the United States. And when that happens, the companies that came to Canada first to build their investor base and establish themselves as true players in the cannabis market will be way ahead of other companies in the United States who try and do the same thing. They'll be leaps and bounds ahead.
Well, I'm bullish as well. Like you said, I agree with you on Americans listing in Canada. So this is going to draw a lot of attention to the CSE. Good job, Barrington.
Well, I do what I can.
But I have to say that I think the valuations are complete abstract art. And like you said, it depends on your position when you're looking at them. And it's going to be interesting to see how this correction takes place, which happens with any new market.
Do you think that consolidation is likely?
Well, I think it's interesting to see micro cultivation, 2,000 square feet growers, a path for some of the, I like the term, the informal market to play into the legal system. That could alleviate some short-term supply issues, and I think it's interesting. We've had some of the production, some industry producers lobbying against outdoor production. That certainly it'll be really interesting in the markets if we see outdoor production. I don't think we're going to see it now. Micro licensing will be the first step, but I think it's going to make a difference, and it'll at least provide a path for people to come in a less security cleared environment and be kind of true farmers and really get that craft product into the market.
This is the most fun industry I've ever been in. Okay, it's like the rock and roll industry. You're going to have the alternative veins. You're going to have the mainstream. So I wouldn't rule out the craft farmers. It's going to be like, yeah, are you buying that from so and so? They're cool. They only make a few, whatever.
I totally agree. I take a look at the alcohol market, and there's room for craft brewers. There's microbrewers. There's that population.
But he doesn't want their weed from Pepsi. They may feel more comfortable with it, or they may want organic Hawaii Island, natural stuff.
With all three of my fellow panel members here, I think it's great what the regulators have done and the lawmakers have done to sort of allow for smaller cultivators to come in. And there'll be a place for smaller cultivators, and I think it'll be similar to what you see in the craft beer business. In terms of consolidation, that's going to continue. I think a difficult place to be in the industry going forward will be sort of that medium-sized company where you don't really have perhaps a unique craft brand, but you're not one of the big players. And I think those are the companies that.
So there are programs in place with certain banks where they will support, and they're starting to do deals with cannabis companies. I think BMO did one with Kronos. Was it Kronos in the States? BMO was a backer behind that. They will be doing Canadian-only transactions, but they are in place throughout the world. So that's going to change over time. The banks will get involved, and they will get involved really, really heavily. It's going to be interesting to see who takes the first real step. That's my opinion.
I mean, certainly like to take the opportunity. I mean, I think BMO is great. I mean, they just did a deal with us as well, and great to see a big bank come into the space. To see the other banks starting to look at it, and they're facing a ton of regulatory pressure from the U.S. I mean, I think every time they do a deal, they're probably getting calls from the regulators, and so BMO has really kind of put themselves out there relative to the other banks and taking charge, and we're able to bank with them because banking is a real issue. I had trouble opening up a personal account with Scotia because my wealth came from public cannabis companies in Canada. I mean, that's the level of issues you have. So it's nice to see BMO taking a lead there. And on the debt side, though, we are seeing Alberta Treasury Board, ATB. They've lent to Sundial, and we're starting to see debt unlock itself. That's going to lower cost of capital. I think that's going to favor the larger producers. They're just going to be able to scale faster, leverage their balance sheets. Makes it harder for the smaller companies. I think as capital becomes more available, I think it goes disproportionately to the bigger players.
Okay, and my last question before we open it up to the audience is, what needs to happen for institutional investors such as pension funds to feel comfortable investing in the cannabis space? Is this something that's achievable in the short to medium term, or do you think that we're more likely a decade away from industry maturity?
Well, I'll do a run at this one. I'd like to start by saying my personal perspective as an investment banker is that capital is always hard to raise. This is one of the more enticing sectors for when you have a quality management team together. But I think institutional investors, I love your positive and optimistic perspective, but I think there are way too many legalities at this time, and I think institutional investment at this time is a pipe dream.
Well, in my opinion, and thank you for that. In my opinion, we were having a concern with getting young investors back into the market. The fact that we have this cannabis industry has gotten the young investor back into the market, although they haven't felt the pain of a real stock market yet. This will help people that are in charge of the pension funds make it more acceptable to start investing in cannabis. It starts, I believe, with the younger investor, and then it'll start flowing through. When you think of the people that were managing these funds and the companies that they were investing in before, times are changing, and you have to stay current. That's my opinion.
Can I just respond to Barrington and say, I agree with you. I love how this market is enticing young people to look at the public markets. It's fantastic. This said, I don't think the pension funds and the institutional investors that are run by, baby boomers are going to feel good yet until they get the proper legal stamps from your firms, for instance, saying it's all done properly. So we're still waiting. Yes, they're preparing. They want in. They're desperate. Oh, they're hungry. They want in, but there's still too many problems.
I mean, it's going to take time.
I think again, it's probably in terms of the term. I think it's probably medium term. Like I think it's Chuck's company is a great example. BMO coming to do a raise with them, and I think more institutional investors as time passes they won't be able to hide from the industry. It's just a reality. It's going to be a matter of time. And I think it'll be probably a medium-term thing. I think once the laws come into effect, once the Cannabis Act comes into force and the rec market takes off, they won't be able to hide anymore. They'll have to come. They'll have to start pouring money into it. So probably a medium-term thing, I would say.
And I was going to say, and for this reason, you want to know people like me at Bellotti Capital Partners, boutique investment banking firms that are not adverse to this risk.
Okay, so does anyone in the audience have a question? Oh no.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Robert, I'm one of the young investors that you speak about, Tracy. And I have a question for Tracy and Chuck. In regards to due diligence for young investors like myself, I've been finding that there's a lack of transparency amongst a lot of the cannabis companies. When I do the things that you ask, I pick up the phone, I call them. And in particular, Chuck's company is one of the worst when it comes to transparency. And there's a lot of unknown, in particular in the retail business, as there's no track record whatsoever with the cannabis retailer. And in particular, one company that Chuck is invested in, Spirit Leaf, that is probably on the floor today. In speaking to their CEO on the phone, pick up the phone, and doing due diligence on that track record, I found that CEO took two other companies straight to bankruptcy, and now is a main cannabis retailer in the industry. Just a couple comments on the lack of transparency in the cannabis industry. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. I mean, it's great to have an opinion. I think, two things I want to touch on. I think on the retail side, it's really early. We're having to make bets. We did a deal for shelf space with a convenience store chain. I don't think we're going to see cannabis convenience store chains, but Couche-Tard out of Quebec was lobbying for that. So it's a bit of a flyer, and you can buy that optionality cheap today, even though it's highly unlikely. Spirit Leaf made some investments. They're looking at a lot of franchises, and you look at the team. They've had some success. The path to success is through failure. And so, you got to make your own decisions. On disclosure side, I think, I got a lot of lawyers on my team. Hugo Isles and the former Ben & Jones Cannabis Group. So, feel pretty good about disclosure. So I'll have to just respectfully disagree on that one.
If I can jump in, as far as disclosure is concerned with cannabis companies, on the CSE, every company is mandated to fill out a Form 7, which is our monthly progress report, which connects the company to the investor. It's not a regulatory requirement, it's an exchange requirement. There's about 15 questions, and therefore you can go back and track monthly how the company's been doing, what they've been doing, maybe they haven't been doing anything. But it gives a way for you to connect with the company on a month-by-month basis. So that's how we're handling the disclosure issue.
Well, I think you can have more fun than that. The pen is a powerful thing. I love young investors. Start a blog. I'm currently in my portfolio carrying X, and I sent 3 letters. Here are the letters, here's the content. I assure you, their investor relations people will probably respond to you in 24 hours. But as we all know, in this new age society we live in, you do attract more, what is it, honey? How does this work, Chuck?
I forget the language.
If you're extra nice to Chuck, he might help you out at the end of the panel.
So on disclosure, on the transparency side of things, as a securities lawyer, I deal with continuous disclosure on a daily basis. And I think your point is great in terms of transparency at this point. And I think that's also going to change as well. The regulators the regulatory standpoint in terms of what the disclosure expectation is constantly changing. So that's something that's going to get better. And I think the regulators are wise to that, and things are moving quickly. So watch the space.
And pull a Donald Trump. Get yourself a good Twitter account. 10,000 followers, and people will start to listen.
I also think the media coverage that the industry is now getting is great for that too. I think the space is so prevalent in the news now that reading the newspaper every day is a great source of figuring out where companies are going. Again, like I said earlier, when you're relying on statistics and valuations, that can be difficult at this point. But read the newspaper every day. I think the industry is getting tons of coverage. So from a transparency side of things, it's harder for companies to sort of do things under the table like they might have been able to do 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But things are moving in the right direction.
And take that one step further. Give the media outlet a hard time. The journalist, the writer, don't just accept what you read. Say, hey, how many hours did you put into this, buddy?
We probably have time for one more question.
Hi, my name's Frankie. As a young investor that got in relatively early, I think most of us were pretty fortunate to receive some significant gains. But I think leading up to the beginning of 2018, we've seen some pretty market corrections. Going forward, now that the market's a little bit more mature and you have more smarter money investing into the market, how would you suggest people like me to adjust their expectations as to what these gains are going to be? We're not going to be seeing 20% gains every day like we saw in November. How should our expectations change now that the market's become a lot more smart, or a lot smarter? Thank you.
Okay, everyone's looking very timid. I'd love to make a couple of jokes here. First of all, that's a gift from God that you got in frickin' early, all right? So adjust your expectations by taking a nice long vacation. Then read some history books called Market Corrections and Crashes, and then come back.
The correction, air quote, was on January 4th when Jeff Sessions opened his mouth, and in Canada, we were waiting to see what was going to happen, and that's where it came off. I think there was about a 40% adjustment. And it came back around February 22nd, February 23rd, that's when it started leveling off. So be aware of what's a real correction and what's just somebody opening their mouth and seeing what's happening. But like Tracy said, 20% gains, take a vacation.
But it sounds like you're very lucky. It sounds like you're very lucky. So get my email and let me know what your success track record is. We may have a young, rock star here.
I think there will, judging by the fact that you got into the investing in the industry early, it probably tells me you got a little bit of a penchant for risk, and that's good. I think what's going to happen in the industry is as the industry develops, there's going to be a place for different types of investors. There's going to be a place for your mom and pop investor who wants maybe a 6 to 7% return on their money every year, right? There's also going to be a place for ambitious investors like perhaps yourself who want to get in early, who are really interested in pounding the pavement and figuring out, wow, this company's going somewhere. I really think the valuation's low. It's going to come down to not every company in the space is going to give you a juicy return like you've probably seen over the last little while. So I think it's good because it'll give an opportunity for all types of different types of investors with different appetites to come in and be involved in the space.
I'll just take 5 seconds. I think the most important date coming up is Royal Ascent. I think June 7th or 6th, but that's the next big catalyst. That's when we'll know legalization is 100% happening. So I think that's going to be interesting. See what happens.
Ladies and gentlemen, how about we give a big round of applause to our amazing panel. Madame et messieurs, s'il vous plaît, applaudissez-vous pour notre panel de vous. You guys did great, and I think the future is actually, if you have more questions, to probably come and see these people at some point during the course of the day. So just really quick around the table, where will you all be right now? Are you going to booths? Are you going to be on the side for a few minutes? Let's start over here.
I'll be on the side for a few minutes. Happy to speak to whoever would like to discuss.
Free financial advice.
Yeah. No, I'm a securities lawyer, so
Free securities advice.
free securities advice. Yeah.
I'll be around the floor for a couple hours.
Yeah.
I'll be around the floor, and I'm going to head over to WeedFD's booth.
I'll be at booth 1623 for today and tomorrow, and then Monday morning, 7:30 a.m. Arcadian Court, 8th floor, Cannabis in the Capital Market, sponsored by the CSC and LIFT with partnership and MFP.
I'll also be on the floor.